One of the questions that I get a lot is, can I use a different grade of oil in my car than the one I've been using? Can I use a different grade than the one that it says up on that little placard under the hood? The answer is yes, you can. But it's complicated, and you really need to hear what I have to say before you make a choice to jump into this oil versus that oil. Most of the times people are asking because they're trying to extend the life of their motor. They're trying to make it last longer. And let's face it, if you make your car last longer, you really cut down on your cost of driving. I mean, you can get a different car, you can buy a used car, you can get the best car you can ever find. But if you can make the one that you own now last a couple of years longer than it ordinarily would, that's how you really save a few bucks. The reason the manufacturers these days are going to thinner and thinner oil is 100% to do with fuel efficiency, fuel economy, and environmental concerns. So there's a lot of pressure on everybody to get cleaner air and all that kind of great stuff. We've got climate issues on the go, and the idea is to burn less gas in the first place. And that's what this stuff's all about. We're trying to get the car to have less internal friction, grab a huge increase in our fuel efficiency. Our fuel economy in miles per gallon or liters per 100 kilometers are going down, and mileage is going up using these types of thinner oils. That's why we're going with them. The problem is that's great for everything except for the motor. So we're going to thinner and thinner oils, which means more and more potential for internal wear on these things. The question that we're getting is there anything else I can do? I don't want to put this thin stuff inside my motor. I want my motor to run well, and I want it to run well for a long period of time. So what is it that I can do? Can I go into a 1030 here? Can I go to a 530? Is there something else that I can do? I think that we have to understand what it is this oil grade is telling us, and then we can make some minor modifications. So the first thing to understand is what these oils are. Basically, the first number here, or the way this nomenclature reads, is this is a 0 winter, 16 oil. In this case here, we're looking at a 5 winter, 40. We've got 10 BW, 60, or in this case here, 10 winter, 60. So what that means is the SAE, or the Society of Automotive Engineers, have come up with a rating system. This is not 3 or 4 or 5 different kinds of oil that are all mixed together in the same jug. This is the rating that we've got across this testing spectrum. This test begins at minus 17.8 degrees Celsius, I believe it is. They measure the flow, they pour this stuff at that temperature into this thing called a viscometer. It flows through, and they measure how quickly it runs by how much runs over a certain amount of time, and they get a number. In this case here, it's running pretty thin. It's close to that of water, almost actually, but it's running thin enough to be designated as a 0. The second half of the test is they take the stuff and they heat it up to 100 degrees Celsius and pour it through the same measuring device. They measure how much goes through, how much volume, how much time it takes to get the certain quantity through, and that comes up with a number. In this case, it's 16. This is a heavier oil. In this case, it's 60. So less oil comes through the meter the thicker it is. So this is a thicker oil versus this one. Similarly, at low temperatures. At low temperatures, this one here is a 5, that's a 10. This one, in the colder the weather, has more oil that's going to flow here. So what we're doing is we want to look at how does this engine lubricate. You look at one of the great examples that we use and we talk to everyone about is it's like a kid water skiing. If you put the water skis on your kid and you throw them over the side of the boat, he sinks down up to his neck. That's where he is. The water doesn't change, but now if you start moving, you pull up on top of the water and the kid on the water skis, or the adult on the water skis for that matter, skims across the surface of the water. That's the same thing that happens with the oil. Once these things begin to spin, there's a velocity component to it, and we're getting up on top of the oil and the engine components. Instead of metal on metal, we're up on top of the oil and we're skiing across the oil, and there's no wear. So the thicker the oil, the more effective that film and the less wear there is. The less wear there is, the longer your car lasts. When those pistons are moving up and down inside their cylinders and you get all that stuff spinning, the oil is dripping down over top from the top of the crankcase and connecting rods and all that kind of stuff. The thicker the oil, the more resistance it has, the more friction it has. So if you want to increase the fuel efficiency of your car, one of the best ways to do it, or the easiest ways to do it, is use a thinner oil. What these engine guys are doing is saying, okay, how do we get 1% increase of efficiency in our fuel mileage? Which is huge. In the automotive world, if they can get 1% better fuel economy in your car, it is a big, big difference. And if you can do that simply by going from an oil that's got the second number of a 30 down to a 20, that's a pretty easy way to do it. They don't have to change anything. They don't have to get the engineering guys to come up with tighter tolerances or looser tolerances. They just go with a different oil and get better fuel economy. That's kind of where we're going with this stuff. As the automakers are looking for more and more efficient cars, they're looking for higher and higher fuel efficiencies. They're going to thinner and thinner oils. Now, if you look at a zero base oil or a really thin oil, they're adding all kinds of modifiers and additive packages. There's stuff for rust improvement, there's stuff for anti-foaming agents, there's all kinds of things added. One of them is a viscosity modifier. If you look at this, here's my little prop here, you're looking at this thing as a viscosity modifier. It's just a piece of plastic that runs like this thing. It's a hydrocarbon chain or hydrogen/carbon/hydrogen/carbon, but it reacts differently at temperature. If you take this thing inside an engine at a nice and cold startup, you get just this. It does nothing to increase the viscosity of the oil as it just runs through that little viscosity meter the same way, with the same flow rate as the base oil. But as that oil begins to warm up, it begins to twist itself, it contorts itself, it becomes one of these little things. It twists to look like this multi-purpose device here for prop purposes. It gets in here, and if you look at this at the microscopic level down here, right in the oil, this thing here gets in, it disrupts the flow of oil. If it's two molecules of oil trying to slip over top of it, with these things in between, it makes it a little harder to move. It makes it a little thicker, which is sort of generally what happens. The behavior pattern of the oil is now thicker than it would have been without these modifiers. That's what they're doing. So when you're looking at where my oil is, really the number that we're looking at is the bottom number, and the second number has been something that's artificially modified to behave thicker. So to the question we get, guys are coming in saying, I've got a new Toyota and it's telling me I'm going to be using this stuff over here, which is the 0W16. What would happen if I went to a 0W60? We know the problem that we have is that these engines have been designed a certain way. We know there's a preset calibration for the oil pump, for example, at this thickness, at this temperature. This is how much oil it's going to pump. We've got bearing tolerances. To get in with a proper oil film or that little hydrodynamic wedge that forms, we have to have an oil of a certain viscosity to actually get in there and maintain that layer. So we get that sort of water skiing effect. So there's a limitation to how high you can go in a motor that comes down, and a lot of it is temperature, a lot of it is application. We've got many pre-engineered considerations here. We look at bearing clearances. You know, if we've got a 2000s clearance in the bearing or we've got a 3000s clearance in the bearing, it makes a difference in how we lubricate it. It makes a difference in what choice of product there is. Certainly that's the considerations the manufacturers are going to have when they recommend this grade of oil versus that grade of oil. So yes, we can make some movement when understanding what these numbers mean in terms of temperature and in terms of performance. It is a big start in making some of these decisions. Personally, I find that, I'm not going to mess with the lower number except to go lower. If I'm using a 5W30, for example, and I know I'm going up to northern climates, and it's going to be unbelievably cold, and if I'm going to set my oil up for that, I'm going to think about dropping to a lower number because that's a reasonable choice. And if I'm heading down to the desert, to, Death Valley or something, and I'm going to pull something heavy and I'm thinking, wow, it's going to be hot, hot, hot there. Then moving above the upper number, that's something that you can consider as well. But you shouldn't go the other way. You can't go from this number here where it's a low number and go slightly higher. You can't go to a 10W30 when it says 5W30. It's just something that's not going to work, as it's going to cause huge problems. And you can't go the other way where you go from a 10W30 down to a 10W20. I mean, as you need the thickness, you can't go lower as it's just a bit of a problem. So in certain applications, the idea is to get an understanding of what it is the oil is doing, what it is we're trying to get it to do. We consider that all in your sort of overall cost. Consider that when it comes to what are the maintenance impacts if I go from this oil to that oil, or if I stay right where the manufacturer is. What happens if I'm pulling a trailer, for example? So there are some other considerations that have to be considered. Knowing what the oil product is where it starts. So generally speaking, the manufacturer sort of have us in this position where we have to use something close to the oil that they're talking about. You know, we can't really go too crazy with it. We can make some product modifications or some choices. I think that we can just sort of enhance based on application only. But generally, you know, you use a car across any time period in the winter where we need to really concentrate on this bottom number. In the summer, we can substitute as long as the number goes up rather than down. We can do a few things. On the cars that come in with oil specified at 0W16, there's really no problem going 0W20. There's really no problem with that whatsoever when looking at the difference in the oil. It's just so small it's not going to make a difference. But if we jump up from 0W20 to 0W60, there's problems. You can't make that big of a difference. But if you're looking to maximize oil performance, like say on a summer trip where you're going to head down to somewhere hot, you can. If you drive down to Death Valley or something like that and you're going to pull a heavy trailer, yes, you could go up on the second number. To increase that by a few, maybe 10, or go from a 0W20 to a 0W30, you could probably do that and the motor will most likely perform better with that. But as a rule, the idea is we're kind of... Of course, whatever the manufacturer is telling us, they'll put a label somewhere on the car. This is the specified oil. This is the recommended oil that we're pretty much stuck to using. So yes, the oil is getting thinner and thinner, but it's being changed out. The whole viscosity thing, it's not really the oil itself that's changing, but it's the additive packages changing. We've talked a lot about oil today. I know it's a controversial subject. I know that it's sort of, we're breaking the boundaries here. We're pushing things back, but there's all kinds of different technicians out there. There's all kinds of guys that have got experience taking these motors down with this oil or with that oil and having a look at what's happening with piston rings and having a look at what's happening at turbo bearings, all that kind of great stuff. What we're really looking to do here is to form a conversation point. We've talked a lot about oil today. I know it's a controversial subject. I know that it's sort of, we're breaking the boundaries here. We're pushing things back, but there's all kinds of different technicians out there. There's all kinds of guys that have got experience taking these motors down with this oil or with that oil and having a look at what's happening with piston rings and having a look at what's happening at turbo bearings, all that kind of great stuff. What we're really looking to do here is to form a conversation point. If anyone out there's got any experience, please put it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what you're doing in the winter with one oil versus another. We'd love to hear what you're doing with these new ultra-thin, ultra-low weight oils that are being recommended by manufacturers. If anyone out there's got any experience, please put it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear what you're doing in the winter with one oil versus another. We'd love to hear what you're doing with these new ultra-thin, ultra-low weight oils that are being recommended by manufacturers. If you